Solving crimes and bringing perpetrators to justice is some incredibly difficult work. Despite what you might think watching super cops on TV, investigators are unable to crack quite a few cases, usually thanks to a lack of leads or suspects. These cases end up going cold for years, but that doesn't mean they all get forgotten. Thanks to increased advancements in crime-solving techniques and technology, there are cold cases solved by DNA evidence almost every day. The perpetrators might have been free for a few years, despite having committed heinous crimes. But not anymore. So let's check out some cold cases that have recently been solved, providing closure for the family members of the deceased. So here are some famous solved cold cases. Sherry Haas. Her harrowing demise has been thoroughly documented on Reddit. In 1994, a divorced 39-year-old Sherry Haas was found murdered in her apartment. Sherry was a mother of 3, but she lived alone in an apartment complex on Palmer Drive in Desert Hot Springs, California, while her children lived with her father. On the night of her murder, at around 10 p.m., Sherry spoke to her parents on the phone. She told them that she believed someone had been taking photos of her and that someone kept ringing her and hanging up as she answered the phone. At around 9:30 a.m. the following morning, her parents went to her apartment to check up on Sherry, but it was already too late. When they entered her residence, they made a horrifying discovery. They found Sherry's lifeless and partially exposed body lying on the floor. According to the district attorney's office, she was found stabbed multiple times and was bitten by her killer. On April 24, 1994, homicide investigators determined from the signs of struggle at the crime scene that she had attempted to fight back. They collected evidence from the crime scene for forensic testing, and the results determined that the other blood found was in fact from a male, and this blood also matched the DNA and the saliva left behind on Sherry's body. However, attempts to find a DNA match on the combined DNA index system were unsuccessful. Unable to pursue the case any further, it went cold for nearly 28 years. That was until February of 2022. Authorities started using forensic genetic genealogy. This procedure matched DNA collected from crime scenes to possible relatives of the suspect who had previously uploaded their DNA to public ancestry databases. Thanks to this extensive database of family trees, they were able to narrow their search down to 48-year-old Sharon Eugene Gatlin as a person of interest. Detectives discovered that, as of 1994, Sharon lived in Thousand Palms, which is about 12 miles from where Sherry was found murdered. The authorities obtained a warrant to collect a DNA sample from Sharon. They went to his home and collected a mouth swab from him and confirmed that Sharon's DNA did match the DNA profile found at the scene of Sherry's murder. On the 4th of March, 2022, the Riverside County Regional Cold Case Team pulled Sharon's car over at the intersection of West 135th Street and arrested him. He is held at the Riverside Southwest Detention Center with bail set at $1 million. Authorities have yet to indicate the motive of the attack or whether Sherry and Sharon even knew each other. I think this might be a terrible and much too common case of stalking gone terribly wrong, and unfortunately, this man has been roaming around free for much too long. I can't put it better than District Attorney Mike Hestron when he said, "I hope Sherry and her family will finally get the justice they deserve and have waited so long for." In Sutherland. On the 7th of August, 2009, at around 8:40 p.m. near Lakeside Road in Greenville, South Carolina, a married couple was exploring the area looking for wildlife when they stumbled across the lifeless and disrobed body of In Sutherland, partially submerged in the shallow water of a creek. The police were contacted, and they collected evidence from the crime scene. From what they could gather, they believed she had been there for a while, without being able to pinpoint the exact time of death. But who exactly was this woman? An autopsy showed that Allison died from multiple blunt force trauma injuries, but that was all they had. After the initial investigation, the case went cold due to a lack of leads. In August of 2020, the Greenville Police Department established a cold case unit to re-examine the facts gathered during the initial investigation. They were able to link a 38-year-old man named Jeffrey Phillips to the murder of Allison. Thanks to cell phone records and evidence found of a financial dispute, they were able to determine what had happened before her death. It turns out, Jeffrey was Allison's frequent cab driver, and they had apparently butted heads because Jeffrey owed her money and was unwilling to pay it back. On the 28th of February 2022, the investigators obtained an arrest warrant for Jeffrey, but he was already being held without bail at the Sullivan County Detention Center, Tennessee, for another completely unrelated murder case, which he is still awaiting trial for. So what were the details of this new case? Well, on the 5th of August 2017, police were initially responding to a call for a parking dispute at 10 p.m. When officers arrived, they found the lifeless body of 28-year-old Timothy Glenn, Jeffrey's roommate, in a wooded area just yards behind the mobile home they shared. The police also found blood on a large rock, a garden hose, and other tools that appear to have been used in committing the murder. Timothy also suffered severe blunt force trauma to his head and 2 wounds to his back. His legs were tied together with a towel, which was used to drag his body away. Jeffrey stepped out of the home just wearing a bath towel and denied any knowledge of Timothy's death to the officers. He said he had to go back inside to prepare for work, but the officers noticed blood on his footwear and fresh scratches on his hands. Upon searching his home, they found a bloody tool on the living room floor and blood in the bathroom. Jeffrey was promptly arrested. Jeffrey told the police that he was mad at his roommate for giving meth to his girlfriend. Apparently, he lured Timothy outside, saying that he needed help taking down a hammock. He then ambushed him, blacked out from anger, and could not remember anything else. Turns out, Jeffrey should have been put away a long time ago. This was another cold case solved, and Allison's murderer was in police custody long before they solved it. Scott Johnson. Johnson was born in 1961 in the United States. In 1983, he moved to England to study mathematics at the University of Cambridge. At Cambridge, he met Michael Noon, a musicologist from Australia who he fell in love with. By 1986, Johnson left his doctoral program at the University of California, moved to the Australian National University on a student visa to complete his PhD, and so he could be with Michael. 34 years ago, a local fisherman came across a gruesome scene on the rocks off Bluefish Point, on the idyllic northern beaches of Sydney. The naked body of Scott Johnson was lying at the foot of a cliff face. On the cliffs above the victim were the neatly folded clothes of the deceased, complete with a pen resting on top. It was December 10th, 1988, and it marked the beginning of one of Sydney's longest-running unsolved murders. It was initially ruled a suicide, but Scott's family never believed that. There was no way their beloved Scott, who moved to Australia to be with his partner, would just up and kill himself, they thought. Scott's professor, the last person he spoke with before his death, informed the authorities that he had just put the final touches on his PhD. It was pretty clear that Scott Johnson was hopeful for the future and could have gotten a job at any university around the world. A renewed police investigation was launched, and in 2018, a $1 million reward was offered for vital information which could help solve the crime. That reward was doubled to $2 million in 2020 when Scott's brother Steve, a tech entrepreneur, put his own money on the table, hoping it would finally bring about the answers they needed. After the $2 million announcement, new witnesses came forward with some vital information. It turns out, the area where Scott was murdered was a known area where gay men would often frequent. Apparently, gangs of men, including Australian Army soldiers, would converge on the cliffs to commit hate crimes and robberies. Another witness told detectives about a group called the Narrabeen Skinheads, who would stalk areas where gay men would frequent and assault whoever they found. Finally, a man named Scott Philip White was fingered for the crime. In May 2020, detectives stormed White's house after they received crucial intelligence leading to a breakthrough in the unsolved crime. But there still was not enough evidence, and the suspect continued to maintain a stance of innocence. Things changed in 2022. The murderer changed his earlier plea of not guilty, and in the Supreme Court of New South Wales, he confessed to the murder of Scott Johnson and will face sentencing on May 2nd, 2022. After about 34 years, the case that apparently could not be solved had finally been put to rest. I think they probably should have offered up the $1 million reward a long time ago. Maybe the case wouldn't have been so cold for so long. Patricia Lorraine Barnes. Patricia Barnes was popularly known in Seattle as the Towel Lady because she would often wear a towel or bandana around her head. She was a 61-year-old homeless woman who lived in various homeless shelters in Pioneer Square, Seattle. Patricia was the victim of a violent crime that took 27 years to solve. It began on the 25th of August, 1995. The police were contacted by a passerby who discovered the lifeless body of a woman in a ditch along Peacock Hill Road in South Kitsap. Her body was found without clothes, partially covered by a sleeping bag, and left in a ditch. Her pink curlers were found nearby, close to the crime scene, but her clothes were never recovered. The cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds to the head. This was a clear homicide case. About 130 pieces of evidence were collected from the scene, and an artist's sketch was drawn from the testimonies of an eyewitness who claimed that she was seen with a 30 to 35-year-old white man, and they had planned to eat at the courthouse park, then go to Federal Way. Yet, with all the information available at the time, agencies weren't able to identify a suspect. So the investigation eventually stalled for 27 years. In April 2018, the homicide case was reopened, and the evidence gathered from the scene was reviewed. They re-interviewed the detectives previously in charge of the case, then sent the physical evidence to Washington and 2 private forensic labs for DNA testing, one in Texas and the other in Florida. By 2021, Othram Labs Inc., a private forensic lab, discovered the identity of Patricia's killer using advanced genealogy processes. They were able to search genealogical databases for genetic relatives to the DNA profile of the unidentified killer. The name of the suspect was a man called Douglas Keith Crona. At that time, authorities had suspected serial killer Robert Lee Yates, but this time, Robert was innocent. But just this time, though. They then contacted the Arizona Police and Pima County Medical Office and discovered that Douglas had died in 2016 due to accidental causes. On the 7th of February 2022, the authorities concluded that Douglas Keith was, with all certainty, Patricia's killer. His DNA was found on her body, on the sleeping bag, and on the cigarette butt left at the crime scene. Although his relationship with Patricia remains unknown, it's suspected to have been a completely random encounter. Douglas had previously lived in Washington, Tacoma, and Seattle. He would have been 33 at the time of the murder, and he had a criminal record that included 5 felony convictions. These ranged from first-degree robbery to second-degree kidnapping. The case was officially closed on the 9th of March, 2022, and the perpetrator, Douglas Keith, won't be facing justice. It's not very often the dead are put on trial, after all. If you don't consider that a bright side, well, his DNA has been put into the combined DNA Index System database to check to see if he's connected to any other cases. Maybe this will exonerate even more serial killers. If you like this video, then I've got more where that came from. Click on a video on the screen and check out what's in store. See you there.